Hello everyone. So this video is actually being made as a sort of reaction video, and it's aimed mostly at my friend Yusef. I mentioned to him that I saw the Jordan Peterson Jubilee debate, and he asked me a lot of technical and specific questions about it, or rather I watched it, I should say, or listened to it at work, when the actual real truth is it's mostly a time waster for me. You know, I got 12-hour shifts. Popping in an earpod or earbud is the only way I actually make it out of the place I work with my sanity intact. But I vowed to rewatch it and take some notes. And here's a thing that'll show you when is it okay to set definitions for stuff, but when is it just being dishonest and nitpicky. You know, where do you cross that sort of line? And so without further ado, I'm gonna go through this here. I don't think debates are particularly necessarily very helpful. You know, you walk in wanting to see your team score. When they do, you log it. When they don't, you forget about it. So this is Greg, one of the Jubilee participants. And Greg here is a very nice guy and way more precise with his language, I think, than Jordan Peterson is throughout this debate. This did not make Jordan Peterson look good. He looks unhinged in this debate. So here we go.
What literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Now, I want to point out here, I like how Greg defines what he considers God. So, clearly the kind of, God of the Abrahamic religions and whatnot. He actually says that twice here. So, he's being very intellectually honest.
Do you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you? Yes? No? Or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify.
Notice this bizarre dodge here. Greg is just a regular kind of all-shucks debater. Jordan Peterson is a psychologist, and yet he's deciding he now wants to bring up physics. There's this joke by Neil deGrasse Tyson that often the person who wants to resort to comparing something to physics is the person least qualified to do so.
Or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well,
again, this is Greg being very honest and upfront when he says, he notice he's not getting angry. He literally wants to know how one thing leads to another. And this is where we see Jordan Peterson kind of try to muddy the waters. Now, at this point, I would say he's still acting as a good faith interlocutor.
Trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you just kind of...
I love how the guy in the background there just smiled, because having watched this video again, parts of it almost make me chuckle, because he's just like throwing and spinning another thing there.
Throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine...
Right? I can infer,
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you.
Okay.
Okay, see, now, there's truth, and I think Greg's going to bring this up. There's truth with a big T and truth with a small t. You know, when we use the word truth, what we mean is that that thing is factual. Here Dr. Peterson is going for a more philosophical version. And yes, there are times when it's appropriate to look at the deeper meaning between truth and how do we come to know knowledge and everything like that. But that would be stuff for like a philosophical seminar. It's kind of like this later point where defining God. Greg's working definition of God, omniscient, all-powerful, all-knowing, sin of sundown, yada yada yada, is actually a very good, nice, clear definition. Now, if this was a theological seminar, I mean, you could spend 4 days, theologians could spend 4 days, theologians and philosophers, trying to work out a precise definition of God. But again, for the most part, what he's saying will do. Truth is fact. When he means God, he's talking about the Abrahamic God.
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason, or my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason.
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this is kind of goes back.
So this is Jordan Peterson doing a bong rip theology thing. So if you have a conscience, there's a little bit of God in you or something like that. This is Christians. He's not the, well, I don't know if he is a Christian, but yes, some Christians do use proof of people having a conscience as proof of God. The argument can be structured a little bit better, and what that is when we appeal to our better selves, or our better nature, as we call it, our better angels, I should say. We can only have this if we have something higher to aim for, and therefore Father God. It's not a perfect argument, but it's actually a better philosophical argument than a lot of the other crap that I've seen come out of Jordan Peterson's mouth. But no, this guy has defined God very, very, very clearly, and now Jordan Peterson is like, whoa, man, I define my God is consciousness, or conscience. And not even a real Christian thing to do. And notice he cites Elijah, who isn't a Christian. I don't know about the Cardinal Newman thing, and I'm probably not going to research that. He's probably misquoting that. Like I said, it's a very popular argument out there that for us to appeal to our better angels, we must recognize that there's a all-good being out there, and that's kind of proof of God. Again, Thomas Aquinas, I think, created that concept, or at least was the first to publish it. And yeah, definitely worth looking into. But yeah, this is where he's now shifting, and this is where he doesn't really want to have a sincere conversation, and this is why he keeps stymieing him at this point, Jordan Peterson in this exchange has become a bad faith interlocutor.
I'm saying initially
I'm not defining it. Elijah
okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that way.
as I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So
He's not trying to be impressive. He's trying to be oppressive. Every time Greg tries to nail him down on something, even going so far as to ask about the prompt, because how these debates are done in Jubilee is a prompt will be put up, so saying something like, traditional Christian values are good for America, or something like that. And then people race for the chairs to sit down into. Again, Jubilee is entertainment. So, and I love how he just snaps at Gregory, says, you're impressive. No, he's trying to muddy the waters. He's trying to use his intellect as a weapon to deflect everything Greg is trying to do at this point.
that I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or we specify, again, it goes back to my example of the Mona Lisa.
I'm defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay, so-
in Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure, so whoever, so
It's
some...
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay,
major
all right,
Old Testament
all right.
prophets.
See, again, he's just trying to fluster Greg. And it's not working, and Jordan Peterson is clearly kind of losing his stuffing. We'll see this, this is the entire debate pretty much.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which...
Ah, there it is. It's not relevant to the context.
I'm using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right,
understand
but
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of
I
God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because, again...
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the
He knows he's losing.
way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than
But-
your definition of the God that you
But
hypothetically disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking...
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I
You should care about common parlance, though. If you're... Yeah, you should absolutely... If you want to be a good communicator, common parlance is going to be a very big deal. Yusef, you may remember the example I said when people come up and they'll ask me, like, where the nuts are at Kroger. Well, those could technically speaking be in 3 different places. And so I'll have to follow up with, well, do you mean for snacking or do you mean for cooking? And if it's snacking, I can direct them to that aisle. If it's cooking, I direct them to aisle 8, where they keep all the produce stuff that's used primarily for baking.
Your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use these
point?
words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I made
a specific
characterized
point
it,
that God
right.
was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
All right. Well,
In your face, facer! The Emperor really has no clues in this case. And I know it's supposed to be closed, but I like using the term the Emperor has no clues. So that'll pretty much sum up when I think someone is being a bad faith interlocutor, and when they're just flat out creating barriers and trying to be nitpicky and just don't want to admit that they're on the losing end of something. Have a nice day.